Good morning, everybody. I don't know if just want to check if everybody can hear me. I hope you're all happy and healthy and wide awake for this morning session. So today being the final day of the Safer Internet Forum. My name is Denton Howard and I'm the Executive Director of InHope. Many of you know me, but many of you don't. And you'll hear more about me and us later on. But before we get into the details of today's, in effect, focus area, there's a couple of housekeeping items which we need to go through, many of them standard, which I'm sure you're all well experienced with Zoom meetings and conferences like this at this point. But first and foremost, in respect of your audio and video, by default, your microphones have been muted and your video disabled, okay? As we progress through today, we're going to have an element of Q&A, but if you have any questions or comments, we will address those as we go through the morning. But I would appreciate if you would raise them in the comments section if you have any questions, and we'll gather them together and take out the duplicates, etc., and get them addressed with the panel. So another point I would like to flag is that you will receive the clarification that this meeting is being held under Chatham House rules. Many of you know what that means, but just the purpose of it is to allow an open and free exchange of information, which means that you're free to use the information that we talk about, but you can't divulge the identity or any of the affiliations of the speakers, or that anybody took part in the meeting. Now, this is a requirement, okay? So please respect this, especially in regard to social media posts. So also, I just from data protection perspective, I want to advise you this event may be recorded, okay? So now with all of the procedural bits out of the way, on behalf of InHope and its member hotlines and the InSafe/EUN project, I'd like to welcome you to today's Safer Internet Forum meeting, and we'll be looking at the new EU strategy for a more effective fight against online child abuse. Now, while obviously it would be great to do all of this in one place in a meeting room where we could all shake hands and meet people face to face, again, we've adapted to this new way of working. So what we'd like to do is start today's proceedings. So I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, June Lowry Kingston, who many of you equally know, but for the benefit of people who do not, June is the head of unit from DG Connect and G3, covering communications networks, content and technology accessibility, multilingualism, and safer internet. So at this point, I want to hand over to June and to give you her welcome. June?
Well, I hope you can hear me. Oh, maybe you can see me as well. And sorry, you didn't see me start when you said keynote. I thought it was opening words, but it just shows how beamed in I've been. So good morning, everyone from Luxembourg. And on behalf of the European Commission, I really am delighted to welcome you to this final day of this year's forum. I used to think that the one day in Brussels just flew by so quickly, but it's amazing how quickly these past 4 days, well, the past 3 days and today, have zipped by as well. I'm sure some of you at least will remember our director, Gail Kent, from previous forums. Well, Gail would have liked to be here today. She planned to be here speaking to you right now, but she recently moved at quite short notice to another director's post in the Commission, so I'm sorry that you're stuck with me. But Gail did send you her best wishes and really her encouragement and support to keep up our efforts in this crucial area, which she has supported with great enthusiasm over the past 3 years. Well, as so much else in 2020, this is the first exclusively online forum that we've been to. And I guess I'm not the only one who's missed the coffee chats and the networking and the face-to-face contact. But I do think that the online format of this year, which has been forced on us, has brought some opportunities. It's made it possible for us to have a broader geographical representation and a more diverse set of young people taking part than would otherwise have been possible. And some certainly would not have been able to travel to Brussels who have been able to take part this year. So that can only be a good thing, I think, for our shared goal, obviously to empower and protect children, all children online. So in this year, when online became so essential so very quickly, I think that's more important than ever. And who knows, once the vaccine arrives, how many of these changes will be long-term or temporary. But I think we've all revisited and all had to change our expectations as to what digital means for work and education and so on. Now, I hope many of you present today have also taken part in other events this week, because we've had a fantastically rich agenda. And we started off on Tuesday with the BIC Youth, which is always a highlight for me of the forum. But this year, their work on the Youth Pledge with specific members of the Alliance to better protect members online is a real example of youth participation and co-creation at its very best. And I think we all gained insights from that work. And in the 4 different sub-projects that they presented, I think they had really effectively convinced industry of the benefits of listening to young clients. And I think it's given us all food for thought. And then Wednesday and Thursday, of course, were devoted to the main theme of the forum, which is creating an inclusive digital environment for all children, children with disabilities and able-bodied children. And young people shared their personal experiences and their ideas for where improvement is most needed. And we saw some great examples from industry and civil society of sharing innovative resources and platforms and tools. And I don't think any of us will forget the work from the Lego Braille bricks, which was just fantastic. Not necessarily digital, but a great project to share, and a European project to boot. And today, our last day, we're taking a policy look at things, looking at really 2 key EU strategies in the field of child online safety. This morning, clearly, we're here to discuss the EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse that was just adopted in July. And this afternoon, we're focusing on the Better Internet for Kids strategy, the BIC strategy, in the session on the BIC policy mapping, to which many of you present may already have contributed, and for which our thanks. Now, those 2 strategies are separated by 8 years. So the CSA, the Child Sexual Abuse Strategy, just adopted this July, BIC strategy dating back to 2012. But they do obviously have common things, one of which is the common goal to ensure that all children can grow up to be confident and competent digital citizens, because that is so important for the children, and also, if you want to take a bottom line point of view, for the European economy. And also a common call for actors, for relevant actors, to join forces across the borders. Just like COVID, online risks and opportunities don't stop at the borders, and neither does our cooperation. And although, I think we've probably all quite literally missed that personal touch of being able to hug people and see people in the coffee queue, I think that this session has given us the time to listen and learn from each other in a different, but I think still very effective way, and to still feel connected as part of what I hope you think of as the BIC family. I know I do. And on that topic in particular, I'm happy to see that we have really diverse expertise at our virtual table today, from different countries and representing so many of the different stakeholders in the fight against child sexual abuse. So we've got Europol and law enforcement, we've got representatives from the Safer Internet Centres and In Hope, we've got industry, ministry, law enforcement agencies at other levels, NGOs, and of course the Commission and others as policymakers. And it's also important, I think, to see that the Better Internet for Kids family is reaching out beyond Europe in this area in particular. Obviously, In Hope is truly global, but we also have the Safer Internet Plus program to help us reach out and support similar centres to our Safer Internet centres in Europe, across Europe's borders, because online safety is an international matter. And it's a source of pride for us that the EU work in this field is recognised as playing a valuable contribution worldwide. And this month alone, me personally had the chance to present BIC strategy and our work, really our shared work, at 2 international conferences, the UN International Telecoms Union event yesterday afternoon, which is why I missed some of the afternoon session, and at the FOSI, the Family Online Safety International event, the big event in the States, obviously virtually. And that isn't just a nice invitation for me, but it's a real clear acknowledgement of the value of our combined work, really our shared work. And such events like these international ones, but also the forum itself, really give us a chance to learn from each other, because we're not sitting on our laurels. We know that we haven't solved these problems, and we know that there's more work to do. And so before handing over to Denton and the other speakers to kick off the discussion this morning, I want to thank In Hope for organising this session at a particularly important time. And I particularly want to thank In Hope and all the hotline staff, those present today or those working today, especially the analysts, for their tireless work against this most terrible crime imaginable. The new strategy is an important milestone for the EU and our action to fight child sexual abuse and exploitation. But any strategy, unless it's turned into deeds, is just an empty shell. And In Hope, with the network of the EU co-funded hotlines, part of the Safer Internet Centres, are among the key players to turn the words of that strategy into deeds, and building on more than 20 years experience in this field. And we at DG Connect, the bit of the commission I work for, offer our firm support to our colleagues at DG Home, who are lead on implementing this new strategy. One practical action you might have already spotted is the pilot project that is open for a rather short time, a call for tender to increase cooperation between industry, law enforcement and hotlines and civil society. But there is much more to come, with the Digital Service Act proposal due in December, comprehensive strategy on children's rights due in the first half of next year, and further legislation on child sexual abuse also due next year, including more details on the proposed new European Centre. So change is coming. And I just want to finish with a quote from the joint statement of the European Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, which was issued just 1 week ago on World Children's Day. So we're making change, but the quote says, children have the unmatched potential to be the greatest agents of change, and giving them the means to reach their full potential is how we build free, inclusive, prosperous, peaceful, and democratic societies. And as we all know in today's world, that those means mean digital. So thank you all for being here. I wish us all an interesting discussion, and I hand over to our experts. Thank you.
June, thank you very much for that. Wise words, kind of piercing, and it's great to see that there's a lot of things coming down the tracks. So that's super duper. So as we move forward today, we're going to talk about the EU strategy, in regard to online child sexual abuse material that June referenced. So it has 8 key objectives, and it's how those 8 key objectives could be implemented. So just to set our own stall very clearly, from an In Hope perspective, we 100% welcome this strategy, because it shows a practical plan which will contribute towards combating online CSAM, or child sexual abuse material as we refer to it. So I also want to be very clear that In Hope will work with all or any relevant stakeholders to contribute towards these objectives, with the objective basically, or with the ultimate result hopefully, of being more effective and efficient in processing reports so the content can be removed and the rights of victims can be protected. So that said, that's sort of a selfish comment in many ways towards In Hope, but in regard to today, I want to talk about what we're going to be doing. So we have an expert panel, and I use the word expert with inverted commas and underline, of 5 different speakers who will present on how they see their collaboration with all the relevant stakeholders to basically support the effective delivery on the EU strategy, and also to acknowledge the challenges that may be faced as it goes through it, and how we can deal with those as they occur. So we'll also cover the need for clear legal frameworks, and the implementation of the Child Abuse Directive across the Union, or the European Union. So we'll also cover or learn about the challenges posed by the coordinated approach of offenders, okay, that are taking, that basically what offenders are doing during the COVID crisis and how that has affected the world of online abuse. So I want to give you a quick introduction to our panel. Now, you will have seen it on the agenda and stuff, but just to run through who we will have, our panel will be made up of 5 speakers that I mentioned. So the first speaker today will be Antonio Labrador Jimenez. He's a team leader in the fight against child sexual abuse material or child abuse in DG Home, which is part of the European Commission. Following Antonio, we'll have Cathal Delaney, who is the head of team under the Project Twins, which operates within EC3 of Europol. Then we will also have Veronique, I should say, Bichou, from the French National Police, and her colleague, Katie Steele. And then we'll be followed from an industry perspective. We have Stephen Turner, who is the Director of EU Public Policy in Twitter. So that's who our panel will be. And as I mentioned, we will have hopefully time for questions. And as questions arise, if you could put them into the chat, that would be really good. So what I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to invite Antonio Labrador Jimenez to give his presentation. So Antonio, if you're going to click yourself on there.
Thank you very much, Denton.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. Do you hear me and do you see me?
Hear you perfectly. In terms of the video, can't see you at the moment.
Okay. Let me click again.
No, you're still the invisible man.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. You know, it's just come up there.
Very nice. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Denton, for the introduction. And thank you very much for the invitation to join this event. To be honest, I have a presentation, but I think it's better if I just speak to you. I feel that we are missing so much face-to-face time that if we now have the opportunity to at least you see my face, we shouldn't miss it. And then I can send you the presentation afterwards if you are interested. Let me give you an overview of this EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse. The first thing to say is that this strategy covers, addresses this issue of the fight against child sexual abuse in a comprehensive way, focusing on the online and on the offline aspects of this crime, and also focusing on all the aspects of the crime, which include investigations, prevention, and assistance to victims. As you know, the situation of child sexual abuse in the EU is not great. The EU, unfortunately, hosts the majority of the child sexual abuse material globally, and the COVID situation has not made the situation easier. And this strategy is the result of multiple calls for action from the European Parliament and from the Council. In particular, there are the Council conclusions on combating child sexual abuse that were adopted by the Council last year. There is also the European Parliament resolution on the 30th anniversary on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, again adopted last year, which called for concrete action in the fight against these crimes in the EU. This strategy, again, as I said, aims to respond to these calls for action with concrete initiatives. As you know, or as you may have seen, sometimes the policy documents coming from the European institutions are too high level. And in this case, given the gravity of the situation, we wanted to do something concrete and specific that responds in concrete ways to the challenges of these crimes, using all the tools available at EU level, which, as you may know or not know, at least I didn't know when before joining the Commission, the European Commission has basically 3 tools to do its job of better serving EU citizens. And the first one is legislation. The EU, the European Commission, drafts legislation in the fight against child sexual abuse. And then once it's adopted by the European Parliament and the Council, the European Commission makes sure that it's fully implemented by all member states. As you may know, the main legal instrument at EU level is the 2011 directive. And last year, the European Commission opened infringement procedures against the 23 member states that had not fully implemented this directive. An infringement procedure is the first stage of the Commission taking the member state to court for failure to implement this directive. So now we are working closely with national authorities to make sure that the current legal framework is fully and correctly implemented across the EU. Then the second tool that the European Commission has to basically change things on the ground is the ability to coordinate among the different stakeholders that fight against these crimes. We work closely with industry, with law enforcement, with NGOs at EU and global level to ensure that there is a coordinated response to the extent possible, and we make an optimal use of the limited resources that are there to fight against these crimes, both online and offline. And finally, the third tool that we have in the EU is funding. We provide funding to organizations that fight against these crimes. For example, the InHope network of hotlines. So in our strategy, we took a look at the problem. We took a look at the tools that we had to make a change. And we came up with 8 concrete initiatives that first focus on implementing and developing the right legal framework. Second, they strengthen the law enforcement response. And third, they galvanize a coordinated and multi-stakeholder response on prevention, investigation, and assistance to victims. I will go quickly over these 8 initiatives. In relation to the legal framework, the first initiative is obviously what I said before, making sure that what we have already is fully implemented. That is the 2011 directive. So now the focus would be on continuing these conversations with the member states for which there is still some transposition issues, and making sure that they are addressed as soon as possible. The second legislative initiative is, okay, first we make sure that what we have in terms of legislation is fully implemented. Then we are going to look at, okay, maybe what we have already in terms of legislation is not enough. This directive, for example, is from 2011, and in the digital world, 9 years is like another era. So perhaps there are some things that we need to be looking at now that they are not fully covered by the directive. So the second concrete initiative will be to launch a study that will look at the possible gaps in terms of legislation and see if there is a need to cover those gaps through a possible revision of the directive or other specific pieces of legislation. And in that sense, we already identified right away a gap that needed to be closed as soon as possible. And that is the fact that by the 21st of December, providers of number independent electronic communication services, for example, Facebook Messenger or email, will not be allowed to continue using tools to detect and report child sexual abuse online. That's why we put forward a temporary and strictly limited derogation on certain articles of the e-privacy directive that were the ones that would forbid the continuation of the use of these tools. This piece of legislation is now being negotiated by the European Parliament and the Council. And we are hoping that the co-legislators, so the European Parliament and the Council, will reach an agreement before this deadline of the 21st of December. The Commission is certainly doing anything it can to support these negotiations and ensuring that the deadline is met. Then for next year, as June already mentioned, we will put forward another piece of legislation that will provide a long-term legal framework for the fight against child sexual abuse online, and which will replace the temporary derogation that I just mentioned. And here the purpose, as described in the strategy, is to consider mandatory requirements for companies to detect and to report child sexual abuse material that they find in their networks. The strategy also mentions an EU center. So we are also studying how this EU center will interplay in this long-term legal framework. One obvious possibility is if the companies, after they detect this material, report to this EU center in the same way as it is happening in the US with NECMEC, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. This is in terms of legislative initiatives. Then the second block of initiatives concern the coordination and the funding aspects of the tools that we have. Another concrete initiative in this section is to strengthen the law enforcement efforts at national and EU level. As I said, investigation is a key aspect of the fight against child sexual abuse. The national capacities in the fight against these crimes vary. And as Cajal and the French colleagues, I'm sure will explain later, international cooperation in the fight against these crimes is key. And frankly, not only within the EU, but also globally, because as you know, these crimes are truly global in nature. Then the fifth initiative covers another key aspect in the fight against these crimes, which is prevention. If you talk to anyone who has been working in this area for a certain time, by the way, including the law enforcement colleagues, they will tell you that there's no way that we will be able to solve this issue through law enforcement action only. We need to go to the root of the problem and address it before a crime is committed, because that's obviously the best way to help victims and to alleviate the workload of law enforcement. For that, we are preparing the creation of a network of researchers and practitioners focused on prevention. The 2011 directive includes a number of articles on prevention, and we see from the monitoring of implementation of the directive that these articles are some of the ones in which member states have more trouble to implement, have more difficulties. And I think you may imagine why, because the focus for many years have been on law enforcement, and there are very few programs focused on prevention in member states. In particular, prevention programs for perpetrators and for people who fear that they might offend. And therefore, we see a need to first develop more the existing programs, come up with new programs, facilitate the exchange of information between member states concerning these programs on prevention, and again, maximize the use of the resources that member states have put and the EU has made available to fight against these crimes from the prevention perspective. The sixth initiative, again, on the line of facilitating coordination, concerns the creation of a European Center to prevent and counter child sexual abuse. There is one center in the US, NECMEC. There's another center in Australia, another center in Canada. We don't have anything like that in the EU, and therefore it makes sense to consider the possibility of establishing this center that could operate under EU rules, that could complement the legislative framework that I was mentioning before, that could ensure transparency and accountability in the way companies operate to detect and report on child sexual abuse online, that could support law enforcement in its investigative efforts, that could also facilitate prevention and assistance to victims. So one pole of expertise that would drive EU efforts. Of course, the mantra for this center will be to not duplicate what exists already, but on the contrary, to facilitate the coordination to ensure that the resources that are put there to fight against these crimes are used in the most effective way possible. And also to facilitate the exchange of best practices that are outside of the EU to ensure that member states can benefit also from that global expertise. And the seventh initiative concerns the efforts by industry. As you know, industry plays an absolute key role in the fight against these crimes. So it's key to ensure that the dialogue with the industry is fluid, and there are concrete initiatives that come out of that dialogue to ensure that companies take the responsibility to fight against these crimes, and also inform policymakers of what are the challenges they face, and policymakers can take this input into account to consider policies and legislation. Concretely, the European Commission has launched this year a technical expert group to try to find solutions, technical solutions, that would allow the identification of child sexual abuse online in end-to-end encrypted electronic communications, which, as you know, it's a challenging topic, but a topic that deserves asking that question. Are there technical solutions that would allow the identification of child sexual abuse online in end-to-end encrypted communication? Yes or no? The work that has been carried out has been done purely from a technical point of view to gather evidence for possible future policy decisions. So we want to continue that work in the context of the EU Internet Forum that, as you know, gathers ministers of industry, ministers of interior, sorry, and representatives from the major technology companies. And finally, I'll be conscious of time, the last concrete initiative of the strategy concerns coordination with regards to the global aspects of that coordination. You know that this crime is truly global, and therefore, even though EU efforts are first and foremost addressed and focused on serving EU citizens and EU member states, because of the global nature of the problem, it doesn't make any sense to circumscribe those efforts to the EU context only. And therefore, we want to continue our cooperation with global partners through the, for example, the We Protect Them Global Alliance to end child sexual abuse online. And once and if we have this EU center, it will serve as a facilitator for that global cooperation with similar centers across the world. I'm going to stop here with just 3 key messages that I would like you to take away from this presentation. The first one is that this strategy aims to be a comprehensive response against these crimes using all the tools available at EU level, both online and offline. The second key message, as June mentioned, is that your input is key. You already see that this strategy aims to be very concrete, but it will remain words on paper if it's not fully implemented. So I can commit my team and my colleagues and the other teams in the Commission, we will do our part, but we absolutely need your help and your input to make sure that this strategy is fully implemented. And many of you have already contributed to the development of this strategy through the public consultation, but there will be future opportunities to continue contributing formally. For example, the inception impact assessment of this long-term instrument legislation will be published in the coming days. That will be a first opportunity to contribute. Then there will be an open public consultation where you can again formally contribute. And I'm also happy to share an email or my email where you can provide additional input that you may have on how to best implement this strategy, the gaps that you see on your work that are not well addressed, etc. And then the third key message is stress the opportunity, the unique opportunity that this strategy represents to make a long-lasting positive change in the fight against these crimes in the EU and globally, and to better protect the children in the EU and globally. There's 8 concrete ways to do that, and we count on your support and your partnership to make sure that those 8 initiatives are fully implemented. Thank you very much.
Antonio, thank you very much for that. I think you'll all agree it was it's comprehensive. I do know there is one question, and if we can answer it quickly, we'll maybe we can address it quickly now. It's on the chat, and it's from Libor Manda, and it's Antonio. Could you please elaborate more on the number 6 initiative, the center? I think if you could give a quick answer to that one, I think it'd be very good, because just address that point.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. This center, we are still studying and analyzing what the specific form that it will take administratively in terms of governance and so on. But the idea is that it is a pool of knowledge and a pool of efforts to facilitate the fight against these crimes across the EU through all the aspects of this crime: investigations, prevention, and assistance to victims, to facilitate the coordination, the exchange of best practices, lessons learned, facilitate research, and just to make a more effective use of the resources that the EU and member states have put and will put in the fight against these crimes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that covers the point very clearly. So thank you very much for that, Antonio. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Mr. Cathal Delaney, who many of you know, but he is the head of the team on the Project Twins within EC3 of Europol. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Cathal, and I will slip away.
Thank you, Denton, and thanks to all of you for the invitation to come today and to speak at this session on behalf of Europol, which I will have to say is always an honor. So in relation to the strategy, a lot has been said already about describing it and about the way that it's hoped that it will work. So my perspective here is from a law enforcement perspective and from Europol's own perspective about how we see the strategy being implemented and what are the challenges that we face during that implementation. So firstly, I'll say that Europol welcomes the strategy. We believe that it's going to be an important instrument in working on this crime area in the years to come. And it's obviously a crime area that is very important to focus on and to make sure that we have everything that we need, all the tools that we need in place in order to work together on. The second thing I would say is that it's absolutely essential that we collaborate together in order to achieve the goal of countering child sexual exploitation and abuse online and offline as well. And I know that's what the strategy is aimed at doing. Antonio has described it. He was one of the authors of the strategy, so he knows it very well. But if there was one thing that I would want you to come away from this this presentation that I'm doing with you now, one thing that I would want you to come away from is that we absolutely have to collaborate, that we cannot work in silos, that law enforcement cannot arrest their way out of this problem, and neither should we try. We should all be working together in order to achieve the aims that are set out in the strategy. The strategy is, and June has referred to it already, and Antonio again, the strategy is nothing if we don't work together in order to implement it. And implementing it means that we use it as a framework upon which we build our actions. And those actions are broadly described in the strategy, and I'm going to detail how Europol and law enforcement are sort of expected and how we should be able to respond to those in this presentation. So like Antonio, I'm going to speak directly to you. I don't have slides because like him, I think it's most important that we see each other at this stage, that we see the people who are talking, and we've all been at different conferences and presentations online at this stage where we see a lot of slides and very few faces. So I just wanted to have this opportunity to look at you and to speak to you directly in relation to it. One of the things that is a part of the strategy is the review of the Europol mandate. Antonio has spoken about the possibility of having the centre as a place at which mandatory reporting for transsexual exploitation and abuse would be channeled and would then be distributed to the member states. And this is, we believe, a very important element of the strategy. And we also know how important it is because we're already doing it effectively for those referrals that are sent to us from the United States where they have mandatory reporting in place already. And that is one of the things that Antonio referred to as being under consideration by the European Parliament at the moment. The legislation for the temporary, the interim legislation rather, for a temporary derogation from the provisions of the Privacy Directive and the European Electronic Communications Code. I find it difficult to understand when you have cases where, for example, you have 200 children who were groomed to produce sexual content in Slovenia over Facebook Messenger, where you have 100 girls who were forced to perform sexual acts in front of the webcam in Norway via Snapchat. I find it difficult to understand why there is an emphasis on the rights of all users over those children whose material is being recorded, who is being circulated and recirculated over and over again. And I think there needs to be definite balance in this discussion and this debate. And I would hope that the Parliament can reach that same conclusion and in their considerations as well. One of the parts of the strategy is ensuring that each of the member states' national teams have specialized units in relation to child sexual exploitation and abuse. And most of the member states, if not all, have a dedicated team for this at the moment. But one of the challenges that we will face is ensuring that those units have the resources and the structure that they need in order to fulfill the mission that is envisaged by the strategy. And the strategy sets out how that can be done. They say that you need to have specialized units that have sufficient resources in order to enable national and international collaboration, that you need to have a dedicated victim identification team. That's a team that's specifically working on this, not as part of other duties. And that in those specialized units, you need to have capacity to enable international collaboration to take place, because exactly as Antonio and June have already said, this crime does not stop at the borders. This crime transcends all borders, and because it does that, we need to have the capability to work together, to collaborate, to coordinate, and to support investigations, which is what Europol does at the moment. Of child sexual exploitation and abuse that are taking place across Europe and across the world. The other element of the specialized units is to ensure that they channel intelligence to Europol in order to allow us to better support all of the national intelligence and all of the national investigative teams that are charged, that are responsible for these investigations, because intelligence is key to this fight on the law enforcement side. It is information, it is data, and data is everything. and being able to provide the results of that intelligence is not only supports but also guides investigations in the member states. And all of those investigations, despite what anybody else might say, all of those investigations take intelligence, they develop it, they cross-check and ensure that it's correct. Their investigations follow very strict procedures within the police themselves. Then you have a level of judicial oversight in relation to the investigations in many countries, including where search warrants are issued and so on. So the rights of those who are being investigated are very thoroughly taken into account. And the rights of those who are being abused and who are in danger also have to be taken into account. And this is something that law enforcement balance very well because our structures, not our structures, but the society's structures are in place in order to ensure that that happens. And we have to trust in those structures as members of that society. On the innovation part, Antonio mentioned it already. Europol is an innovative agency. We always look to do things differently, to do them better, to do them more effectively. And examples of that with Europol in relation to child sexual exploitation and abuse, a very good example, I think, is the Victim Identification Task Force, which we started in 2014, has now resulted in the identification of more than 390 children out of the activities of the task force, which is a partnership arrangement where we bring partners from we extend invitations to all of our partners to attend. In the most recent task force, which is only just concluded, it was entirely virtual for the first time ever because of the COVID restrictions. We had 23 different participants from 14 different agencies and countries, including Interpol, at that, and 9 children identified already as a result of those efforts. So not only is it an innovation in the way that law enforcement works, but also innovation on top of innovation through the virtual engagements that we did this time. Other innovations that we've been involved in, the Trace and Object Initiative, crowdsourcing information from the public in relation to objects which, when they're identified, can localize investigations on child sexual exploitation and abuse. And the Say No campaign, which we launched in 2017 in relation to online sexual coercion and extortion of children, either for financial gain or for additional child sexual exploitation material. And these are ways in which we can offer our experience, our knowledge in implementing the strategy, working with you, working with other partners to bring forward initiatives like these and to work more effectively together. Another element of focus for the task force, or not for the task force, but for the strategy rather, is the online undercover area. And as Denton mentioned, during COVID-19, we as an agency provided reporting to our partners and to the public in relation to trends that we noticed during that period. And one of the trends that we noticed was how incredibly robust and resilient the darknet offenders were. The period had very little effect on their level of activity, which is usually quite high, and that continued to be the case during the pandemic period. So the importance of having online undercover operatives is that they are able to infiltrate these communities which believe they operate in anonymity, and to bring forth information, intelligence from them that could allow for the identification of individuals and for the disruption of the activities of these groups of individuals who reinforce one another's belief that child sexual exploitation and abuse is a valid thing to do, and that they are entitled to do it, and they should be able to do it, not only in the darkness but also in public as well. The preventive part, I've spoken a little about already. Just to go back, actually, in relation to the online undercovers, one of Europol's functions there is coordination, it's deconfliction of investigations, it's working to ensure that that those who are investigating online have as much intelligence as possible on the targets that they are focusing on, so that they can get the best possible result for the resources that they are putting into their work. And that's something that we've done consistently over time, and we're committed to doing in the frame of the strategy as well. On the preventive front, I've mentioned already the Say No campaign, and during the COVID-19 period, we also implemented a number of other initiatives, which involved, for example, the e-safety commissioner in Australia, also Protect Children from Finland, and the Amber Alert Network. We worked together with them to either use products that they had already produced, like the guide for parents and carers from the Safety Commissioner's office, or to amplify products which were being created and distributed, such as those from Protect Children in relation to their reporting campaign, and Amber Alert in relation to their grooming campaign. So we have a lot of experience in this area, and we have a commitment not only to our law enforcement partners, but to our NGO and other partners in this regard. So I think I've covered most of the points that are raised in the strategy in relation to Europol, and hopefully given you an illustration of how it is that we will be able to support them in the future. I mentioned challenges, and one of the challenges that we face as an agency, and that law enforcement always faces, is to be able to have sufficient resources to do the work that needs to be done. There are many demands that are in place for law enforcement to do different types of work, do different types of job, and many groups and requirements would say that all of those have to be regarded equally. But what the strategy is saying is that we have to prioritize this area, and we have to make sure that we have honest, open, and robust discussions about allocating resources to this area in order to be effective in this fight, in order to make it more than scaffolding, in order to make it more than words on paper. So I think you've had the introduction by June. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here each of the days prior to this, but I think you've had a very good conference over the last number of days, and I congratulate the organizers on everything that they have done in bringing it forward. And the inclusiveness is an absolutely essential message in relation to online activity and in relation to ensuring the safety of children, of all children online. So with that, what I would say to you is to go and please continue to do the amazing work that you are already doing. The amazing work that we are all capable of doing together, and in implementing the strategy, I believe that we can achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathal. Always clear and to the point. So I think Cathal has summed it up quite well in terms of from the perspective of Europol. I'm going to reuse an expression which was sort of referenced earlier by Antonio, but in terms of, I mean, the law enforcement will never solve the issue of online child abuse on their own. There's an overused expression, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. I can't remember who said that first, but equally, law enforcement are vital because they're one very large piece of the solution. But on the other end, obviously the audience here, many people are from an awareness and an online safety environment. Obviously prevention, it'd be much better if we can prevent these things from happening in the first place. That would be the ideal situation. But in between the prevention and the law enforcement part, there is the aspects of detection, reporting, but also, and I'm drawing this for a particular reason, in the chat there's a number of references related to getting involved with offenders and the Stop It Now programs, and there's a number of links which have been on the chat which you may find useful for background information. But I will also say the detection, and we've come back again and again, if it's been referenced twice at this point, the detection issues, if industry or anybody else for that matter is not allowed to automatically detect content using a scanning technology, then we're in, well, not scanning, automated detection like photo DNA within Europe, then it's like you're going in, and In Hope has used the promotion, the See No Evil campaign. If we blindfold the situation, then nobody's going to find anything, but it won't stop it being there, and it won't stop the abuse happening. So I want to sort of move on now to the next speaker, but Carl, thank you very much for that. What we now have is, you've seen from the international perspective, because Cathal has to wear many hats and Europol has to cover many areas. But now what I'd like to do is to introduce you to Veronique Bichou, from she is the chief of the Central Unit for Minors Protection in the French National Police, and Katie Steele, who is a deputy in the Central Unit for Minors Protection in the French National Police. So if I could let you away, ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Denton. Good morning, everybody. We are really pleased to be in front of you today to talk about this topic. Really, it's a strong topic for us. So I'm the head of the Central Unit for Minors Protection, and Katie is my deputy. The Central Unit for Minors Protection is a law enforcement unit which is part of the Central Directorate of Judiciary Police in France. This specialized unit counteracts online child exploitation and transnational child sexual offenses. The unit is an operational group composed of 14 specialized investigators in two main areas: the fight against child sexual exploitation material on internet, and the fight against transnational child sex offenders. Concerning the fight against child sexual exploitation material on internet, the principal objective of the unit is the arrest of producers of CSAM, especially of prepubescent children, and the identification of victims of high-risk offenders. To achieve this, the unit is in contact with the international CSE database of Interpol X. The members of the unit are authorized to carry out online investigation under a pseudonym and are experts at analyzing CSAM and identifying victims. Concerning the fight against international child sex offenders, in France, the Central Unit for Minors Protection is the only unit to deal with this field. The activity is linked to the investigation on internet because the transnational sex offenders produce CSAM abroad and then disseminate this material online. To progress in these investigations, the Central Unit for Minors Protection is in close relation with the associations and NGOs of destination countries. These organizations are essential sources of information to learn about the behavior of French nationals abroad, behavior that can lead to investigation in France. Within this investigative framework, the Central Unit for Minors Protection is the leading reference unit for the emerging phenomenon that joins child sexual exploitation and transnational child sex offenders, the live streaming, also called live distant child abuse. The Central Unit for Minors Protection, the national focal point, is the unit service that communicates with specialized agencies worldwide: FBI, HSI, Argos Task Force, NCA, CEOP, and so many others. International technical and institutional cooperation is essential when dealing with these crimes. And finally, the unit is involved in these subjects within Interpol and Europol through the group Impact. Recently, France pays more attention to the fight against child sexual exploitation, and especially online. We can highlight an improvement in digital capabilities of specialized units all over the country, in specialized trainings for officers. We are part of several task forces, the Victim ID Task Force and the Undercover Task Force, both under the authority of Europol, which are collaborative EU international efforts to identify children victims. We are also trying to highlight the need of a national prevention plan, which would include multidisciplinary ministries such as justice, education, health, and home office. Under the action of politics, some offenses have been either created in our area of work or their penalties have been aggravated. But actions still have to be taken in many areas, and this is where the influence of a European legislation can help. The pandemic was the occasion for my unity to work in close collaboration with a private company and an association in a brand new initiative concerning online games. In the game Fortnite, an avatar was created to permit children to reveal through the game sexual or violent assaults during the lockdown. Currently, we are working to consolidate this idea.
So, as Véronique has said, in France we have made some improvements lately, and but we need to go further, and that's why we welcome the EU strategy. And we would like to talk about two topics that are really urgent for us and need to be dealt with soon. So the first problem that we encounter at the moment in our work is the new European legislation that will not allow online service providers to alert authorities about child sexual exploitation. So in our unit, we get a huge amount of cases are initiated thanks to action taken by online services and their referrals. Véronique mentioned in the introduction that our unit is the point of contact in France for any information that is coming from abroad and dealing with child sexual exploitation. So we receive all reports coming from online service providers from abroad, directly or via Interpol, Europol, or other partners. So, for example, we are direct partners with NECMEC, which is the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children. And to give you an idea of the amount of referrals we receive, since the beginning of the year, we have received about 80,000 reports from NECMEC, about 50,000 of them from Facebook, 13,000 from Instagram, and we can say about 50,000 of these reports are actionable, so should be dealt with by law enforcement and initiated a case by us or sent to local units. So these reports include reports about abuses, images and videos online, but not only. Other situations of imminent danger to children and hands-on abuse are also highlighted by these referrals. Just to give you an idea of the kind of referrals we received in our unit, in the last 2 weeks, we have received 5 international reports from online service providers concerning hands-on abuse. So we've had a report about an uncle abusing his 3-year-old nephew, and this since 2019. He took photos of the abuse and uploaded them to his Google Drive with other abuse material. And thanks to the automatic detection of this material, we were able to find this hands-on abuser. We've also had a case of a grandfather that was taking pictures of his 2 grandchildren, 9 and 11, and asked them to do live video chat of their abuse. A 20-year-old that was raping a young boy, 10 to 11-year-old. A young man that was grooming girls via videos and asking them to masturbate and cut themselves. And a 12-year-old boy abusing his 4 to 5-year-old sister. So if these online service providers are no longer able to automatically detect these situations, we will have a lot of cases that will not be brought to our attention. So that means a lot of offenders and abusers that will go unnoticed by law enforcement. We're not the only unit in France to receive referrals from online service providers. There's also the unit called Pharos, which is a law enforcement unit, and they work in close collaboration with an association that's a national hotline called Point de Contact. And so to give you an idea of how many they receive, in 2019, they received 25,600 reports, and nearly 3,000 of them came from Point of Contact. So this collaboration between law enforcement and online service providers is essential for our work. And it's even more essential since the COVID crisis, because we have noticed a huge, a big amount of more referrals and more people online, and it is essential that we carry on working together. The discussion to no longer allow these online services to provide this information would cause a great deal of harm to our work. And we need this detection to be able to be of abuse images online, but also detection of keywords. The keywords some abuse happening online is not only abuse via images and videos, it's also discussions in between minors and adults that can lead to solicitation, that can lead to a meeting between an adult and a minor. And so we need online service providers to be able to detect child sexual abuse via keywords. For example, we had a case where a 12-year-old minor was discussing with an adult male online. There was no exchange of images, but only discussion. And they were planning to meet to have sexual intercourse. And he was this minor's teacher. So this is another thing that needs to be carried on. We need to carry on moving forward, and we need to carry on keeping this close collaboration between law enforcement and national or international hotlines. And we think that it's important to not move backwards and to carry on moving forwards. That's why we really welcome the EU strategy and the continual work that we need to be doing together. We also support 100% the idea of a European NECMEC. We think this will bring a lot of more referrals to us and help the organization in between the national hotlines, the online service providers and the law enforcement, and help distribute all the referrals in Europe. So that's the first topic that's important to us in this EU strategy. The second one, and we've noticed a huge amount of cases that are problematic and that deal with end-to-end encryption. In the last few years, we have noticed that more and more offenders have moved to end-to-end encryption to be able to discuss and exchange images, for example, on WhatsApp or Telegram or any other areas where they can have end-to-end encryption. And it is difficult for law enforcement to be able to act in these situations. And at the moment, automatic detection is not possible for end-to-end encryption. So this is a point that we'd like to talk about, and would like to put forward that the fact that we need to do something about this. We need to work together and find a solution so we can actually do something about these offenders that are on end-to-end encryption. Just with our kind of offenders in this area, they are very well informed. They keep informed about what's new, what the evolution, and they talk to each other and they tell each other where to go and what law enforcement can do and can't do. So they know that at the moment end-to-end encryption is difficult for us, and that's why we see more and more of these offenders move into end encryption apps. So those are the main things that us as French law enforcement would like to welcome in the EU strategy and push forward. That's all from us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Veronique and Katie. I think you've articulated very clearly, one, the situations that you face, and two, your fears if the strategic objectives, and the key one being the protection under the derogation under the privacy derogation, sorry, the temporary legislation in regard to the privacy. So just on that point, it's quite important that everybody, I know everybody's heard this multiple times, but the political machinery is in play at the moment, so politicians are always open to being nudged. So any influence you have with your national MEPs, or any influence you can make in that process, obviously we are super in favor of the legislation. So anything you can do in that respect. And if you want to get informed, I'm going to be completely brazen and say that you should look at the INHOP website and the See No Evil, Hear No Evil, and that'll be a gateway to all the legislation and all the information. Okay, so guys, thank you very much for that. It was very good. In respect, there are some questions which, in terms of numbers, again, we'll refer the details, but it's a question from June. But it was a question is, can you confirm the figures you mentioned, 80,000 reports from NECMIC and 15,000 reports actionable? In other words, 20% were only actionable. Do you have any input to that?
Yeah, those numbers are right. We receive about 80,000 of them, but only 50,000 are ones that we actually can act on. I think because there's a difference of legislation in between America and France. That's one point, and sometimes there's no actual information that we can act on. There's not enough to actually have a case on these on some of the reports.
Okay. I could also, I'm going to be again completely brazen in respect of there's an EU-funded project called the Aviator Project, which INHOP is a partner on, which is involved in the coordination of NECMIC reports, and that's part of that puzzle as well. So none of these things stand on their own. So I hope that clarifies things. I
think I saw the question that she was asking 15 or 50. It's 50,000.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so with that, just before we move on to our next speaker and the response, I just want to flag in respect of, I mentioned the Chatham House rules. You're free to use anything you hear here, but if you could not, if anybody is tweeting or using social networking, if they could leave identities out of this. So there's been one incident so far, so please, which has been corrected, so that's one that was drawn to their attention. So please, guys, be very cautious about that. So with that said, I would like to now introduce you to our next speaker, who is Stephen Turner. Stephen is the Director of EU Policy at Twitter, and he's going to come at this from an industry perspective. So it's all the floor is yours, Stephen.
Thank you, Denton. Appreciate the invite to this session, and thank you again to InHope and everyone who organized Safer Internet Forum. It's great to be a part of it again this year. And again, InHope for all the work that and the partnerships that you continue to do and build over the past couple of years. I know there's a lot of work still upcoming, so hopefully we can continue to help contribute to that. I know the previous speakers touched upon a number of issues, particularly around the EU challenges and the need for an inclusive and comprehensive approach. And Twitter, from our perspective, and I know a number of our industry partners as well, are committed to collaborate with all stakeholders on addressing this issue, which goes both beyond a lot of the concerns that we see online and into the offline world as well. And for my interventions today, I'll highlight 3 areas part of the EU strategy. The first one being some of one of the topics that have been raised a little bit in the past couple of interventions. This is around the legislative approaches and some of the gaps that we're seeing overall. And overall, looking at the EU strategy that's coming up, we're very encouraged that the European Commission is going to start looking at the gaps that currently exist. And Antonio highlighted one of those significant gaps, which is the current situation in the EU, and highlighting almost an age-old debate and sometimes a battle that we see between privacy and safety, and putting some companies and technology in the middle of that and creating a vacuum in terms of legal certainty. And just to give some context on what this means, at Twitter we take a very proactive approach in terms of combating child sexual exploitation and material on our service. This is meaning that we are investing in and leveraging technology to proactively detect and remove accounts and content from Twitter. We also allow the ability for reporting and for people to send us through reports itself. And just to give you a sense of the figures there, from our last transparency report, we removed over 264,000 accounts, and over 84% of those accounts were removed proactively. And we have obviously people who are reviewing these as well to make sure that we are trying to limit any kind of mistakes that we have on the service. Our updated transparency report will be coming out towards the end of the year, so we might have a new number and new information on that I can happy to share. But overall, when we're made aware of links, images, or content promoting child sexual exploitation, they're removed from the site and then reported proactively to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, which I believe everyone is quite familiar. And for this to continue, companies really need that clear legal framework in which to be effective against the threats we see, both to children and vulnerable individuals online and offline. And again, looking at this from a very global perspective. And this is why it is important that the proposed derogation that has been mentioned already for the provisions around the e-privacy directive to allow the use of technology to detect this type of material and other types of material as well is so important, and to allow us to continue to work in this space. Without this, obviously it puts at risk both children and vulnerable individuals, and as I mentioned, leaves companies with legal uncertainty on how to move forward in addressing the illegal content side of the issue in a proactive manner and leveraging technology. But what we've seen overall within the EU, and I don't mean to be overly critical, but since I'm given the opportunity, of course, this is starting to follow a trend that we're seeing with new legislation being rolled out with little or no consideration of how this fits or aligns to existing rules. So again, I'm encouraged by the fact that there's going to be an examination, research and overview of how this will eventually pull out and fill some of those gaps that currently exist. And some of the challenges that we see are, the legal frameworks are very much country or regionally specific. And our French colleagues had mentioned some of the challenges with those cross-border issues between information and understanding how those fit within the US and France itself, but even within the EU, there's challenges to address how the nature of information, data, and content are being shared. And even in some cases, national restrictions on storing of and sharing of data and content deemed illegal in some countries. Some of those countries are no longer part of the EU, but they're still part of the solution to addressing some of these challenges. Mr. Delaney touched on a key point, and I think it's at the heart of some of the challenges that we see in terms of making sure we're balancing these rights. And these frameworks really need to respect the rights and freedoms of people using the services, ensuring privacy, transparency, awareness, and accountability are a part of the approach. And this is not only for companies. I'm encouraged again to see that Europol has done a good job in putting out transparency reports and trying to tell the story. And some of the examples that have been shared today help to amplify and exemplify some of the success of these technologies and what it can lead to. And I think more of that will help to give a sense of why these technologies are needed, why this approach works, and why it leads to results both in the online and offline space. The second point I want to touch on is the EU Centre to Prevent and Counter Child Sexual Abuse Online. This is, I think, a great opportunity to bring together some of the best practices and create more synergies between member states, law enforcement, companies, civil society, and even researchers for better collaboration and better work around prevention of this type of material and these type of behavior taking place. The concern we start to see is that every country or government wants to show progress in how they're fighting and how they're addressing this issue. But sometimes creating some of these entities are seen as a good way forward, but making sure that they work in practice and build on existing frameworks. And I like the mantra that Antonio brought up, which was, do not replicate what already exists. And I will take his mantra and use it as much as I can in this criticism, or at least my feedback in this respect, because I think this is really some of the challenges that we foresee maybe being further down the road as the center starts to come together. And from a company's perspective, we're facing a global challenge. A regional or a national approach to reporting that it further divides resources, both for smaller companies, but also for law enforcement and other agencies. And it also adds some more political dynamics to the ecosystem. And in some cases, we see even different technological approaches, different hashing databases, and different technological requirements that may not fit at a global level. So making sure that those are all synergies that can hopefully fit together in the way forward. And even within the center, we start to see some of the legislative gaps that we've been noticing over the past year, particularly with the uncertainty around the future of what the privacy shield and transfer of data between the US and the EU may be, or transfer of data outside of the EU. And even the Commission, what we've started to see are a narrative around data localization. This further threatens the ability to build collaboration, share information, and help with global partners on addressing this very global issue. And I think that is something that we really need to understand a little bit better and build into the framework and to the gap analysis that we look at going forward. And as I think one of the big aspects that Mr. Delaney from Europol mentioned is that we need to help build capacity for law enforcement to be able to pursue these crimes that are being reported. The French law enforcement mentioned receiving 80,000 accounts just in the last year or in the last period. That's a large number. How do we make sure that they have the ability, the knowledge and understanding and resources from both the company's perspective, but also internally to address some of these concerns? And I think finally, the other aspect is around the multi-stakeholder cooperation. I think this is the biggest opportunity that we see, and to provide more resources and avenues to help build awareness, digital literacy and education, and most importantly, cooperation in this space. There's always a great chance that we see child sexual exploitative material that will be disseminated through cross-platform engagement. And so it is essential that we form partnerships with not only industry peers, but with NGOs, government agencies, and law enforcement globally to address this concern. And this global challenge really requires an inclusive and global approach. And we need a broader range of players that are brought to the table. Some of these new players and new companies bring innovative approaches to new challenges that we see emerging in society. This is not a new issue that we're dealing with, but we see new techniques being used. And what we want to see that there's a need to go beyond just a few select social media platforms and bring in everyone part of this ecosystem, device manufacturers, hosting services, ISPs, app stores. Everybody will help to create a meaningful difference in this non-competitive space. And I think there's so much being done that could help align our objectives and make sure that we are all addressing this in a very cohesive manner. From a Twitter perspective, we're always on the lookout for meaningful partnerships with experts in the space, whether it's through our Ads for Good program or other efforts to help promote and tailored messaging from our NGO partners for the purpose of bringing greater attention to their campaigns. And we work with a number of regional and global partners with our Trust and Safety Council, including InHope, NECMEC, ECHO in Germany, and even Thorn, who's leading the new approach to technological advances in this space. So it is essential that we need collaboration built on learning, knowledge sharing, and building relationships. This will help make us more effective to combating this issue in the future. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'll cede my time to answer any questions, but thank you again for this opportunity, and looking forward to taking part.
Thank you, Stephen. Very well articulated. Can I say well done? There has been one question which has appeared on the chat from Carolina in Brazil. And I just want to decipher a little bit what it is. So the key point is, though there's 2 points, but the first one I think is probably easier. And I'm going to paraphrase here. The question verbatim says, what is the current policy of Twitter on matters of new hashes, but meaning the previously non-seen, or not previously seen images, in other words, new content. Is there any automated system available on your platform, AI, etc.?
Yep, and happy to talk through some of the way that we proactively approach some of these issues, particularly around child sexual exploitation. And I'll share in a second just our link to our transparency report, which details what kind of technology we use. So just to give a brief overview, we do use media hash detection, working with a number of partners, obviously NECMEC and Thorn being some of our big partners here. We also, because of the nature of Twitter, it's very different than some of the other platforms. So always trying to think of how people are using our service. We're a very public platform, so tweets and everything is available very publicly. What we see then being used as very much a gateway platform to go other places. So trying to make sure that we are in that collaborative space and addressing some of those concerns. So leveraging machine learning technologies, trained to detect some of these violations, looking at third-party links and how they are being shared and how we can better detect the spread of information in that respect, and see where we can start to cut things off at the heart, rather than chasing content or chasing individual pieces of content across the service, trying to make sure that we're addressing things even in the offline or a website or anything like that. And looking at even, looking at signals around how people are behaving, what kind of accounts they follow, how they're interacting, but also if they've been banned before, making sure that we are making sure that they don't have the ability to come back to the service and can carry on with their similar approaches. And then I guess on the back end, looking at how we're addressing the review and reporting aspect is really leveraging technology also to prioritize how our teams are addressing these things as quickly as possible. So making sure that technology is putting in front of our teams the most prioritized and important aspects and important content, so that can be addressed as soon as possible. So that's kind of the whole picture, and hopefully that addresses some of the concerns, but happy to share some more information.
Thank you, Stephen. I think by sharing that report, I think we'll probably go a long way towards answering the second part of the question in regard to circumstantial pattern identification, which is a new term on me, but I think it's about behavior and analysis and detecting content that way. But I think if you could share that report on the chat, the link on it, that would be great. And then we can do follow-up questions offline or something like that if there's any issues with that. So Stephen, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank you for your presentation today. Now we are basically at finishing time, but we have a couple of minutes. So I just want to pull together a couple of observations of what we've seen today. And first of all, I'm not going to say what Stephen just said because it's fresh in everybody's minds, but he's given you the perspective of industry, and they want to basically stop the content from being disseminated on the platforms. We've heard from international law enforcement, in the case of Colin Delaney and in Europol, in terms of what they see in regard to the strategy and the positives and the things that they would like to see moving forward. And it's about again, it boils into primarily the legislative perspective in terms of putting the tools in place. And then we heard from the French National Police, from their perspective of the challenges and their situation. They have to deal with what's in front of them, and they're dealing with after crimes have happened and there have been victims. And obviously, we'd all prefer if the victims never became victims in the first place. And then prior to that, we've heard from Antonio Laborde Jimenez from the European Commission, DG Home, in terms of where the strategy has come from, its original objectives, and what they foresee happening as we go forward into the future. And so all of these seen, we see that there's a strategy, we see that there's challenges ahead in that strategy. We see that there is a will, I think, on all parts to take it forward and be positive. I mean, I sometimes, I personally, I look at these things and I go, you know, where is this going to go? But I'm extremely positive about this, and everybody I've spoken to on this subject is very positive about it. And hopefully, if we can get all of everybody in the same on the same hymn sheet, we can make a big impact. And it's everybody on this. I would say, if we were in a room, everybody in this room, or every organization represented in this room. I mean, currently there are 106 people on this call. We all have a part to play. We can all use it. Then there's a, and I just want to bring up a point that Ben van Mierlo raised the point in terms of COVID-19. Of course, that has affected everybody, and hopefully we will, everybody will be happy and healthy. And when we get into a post-vaccination situation, we'll all be able to meet face to face and have the coffee, and when an event like this finishes, have a drink afterwards. So again, I just want to close off today. To bring it back full circle, I think I can speak for all of us when I say that the strategies and objectives, they're a very positive series of steps. They move in the right direction. And in InHub's case, is a vision towards an internet free of CSAM, but also from practitioners' perspectives, we like to see a world free of victims. So in conclusion, I'd like to acknowledge the European Commission, who provided for funding for what we're doing today, but in general for both InHope, InSafe, all hotlines, awareness centers, helplines, not just today, but over many years, in InHope's case, going back to 1999. So I'd also like to take the opportunity to remind everybody that events like this, they don't happen sort of instantly by themselves. There's many elements that go on behind the scenes to make the magic happen. And with that, I'd like to thank the EUN team who did an awful lot of the heavy lifting on this, especially Hans Martins, Carl Hopwood and Sarah Willoughby, and the rest of the team in Brussels. I'd also like to thank my own team, especially Samantha Wolf and Charlotte Van Lanschot. So they've done a great, so a virtual handshake applause for them, please. And if I've left anybody out, I apologize. But on a more general sense, I'd also like to flag InHope and InSafe and or EUN. We've been EU project partners for many years, and we work very, very closely under the currently under the Lot 1 project. And we hopefully will look forward to working with them and the European Commission going forward. So as we're closing out these sessions, and before I say, if you like, the end, I'd like to thank everybody for their time, for their participation, their input and their interest. And hopefully we go forward and make a larger impact and achieve our overall missions. So with that, stay safe. I hope this is the first time I've said this today, which is have a happy Christmas, because it's only 28 days till Christmas, and stay well. So thank you very much, everybody.